the good old summertime, in the good old summertime.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Golden Age of Cricket podcast. My name is Tom Ford. The phrase, the Golden Age of Cricket, is so indelibly linked with the sport's 25-year period prior to the outbreak of the First World War that it might seem folly to question it. It was a phrase popularised by the most famous cricket writer of all time, Neville Cardus, which only adds to the apparent sanctity of the idiom. But how accurate is it? And does it encapsulate the age and everything it represents? Today, with the help of my guest, I'll attempt to answer a question I've pondered for a while. Was it really a golden age of cricket? Tim Wigmore is a sports writer for Britain's The Daily Telegraph and has also written for The Economist and ESPN Cricinfo. He is the author of Crickonomics and Cricket 2.0 Inside the T20 Revolution, which, in 2020, won the Wisden Book of the Year. His latest publication, Test Cricket, A History, is a vast, sweeping narrative of 150 years of red ball cricket's highest format, and it's the publication which concerns us today. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
So, Tim, how much did you know already, or how much did you think you knew about the golden age of cricket prior to this project, and what aspects in particular did you find interesting?
So I think I knew the golden age, probably know where a lot of people know, which is kind of through the myths and the kind of folklore around it. And obviously I knew it quite well. To the extent I knew it, actually, it was the photos that lingered. And I would think, the Ranji photos, obviously the very famous, the Trumper, really iconic photo. So those were and you kind of, they were kind of central to how I was thinking about it. Part of my research, I looked at archives. I also looked at stuff like collective writings from Ranji, from Spofford. I know a little bit before but actually to get a sense of what it felt for contemporaries was really interesting, and the changes that do happen. And it is the whole architecture of Test cricket is changed so dramatically in this period in terms of the batting more than anything else, because of basically huge improvements in the quality of pitches means that batsmen can start to trust the bounce a bit more, and we see its evolution in scoring, and we see Ranji and the leg glance and stuff. So we have these seminal evolutions in how the game is played, and then I suppose the flip side of that is it's take a step back. Such a golden era, then why are only 3 countries actually Test nations at this period?
Yeah.
Basically, the great what-if moment for cricket, the great sliding doors moment for Test cricket is then 1909 when the ICC, first ICC is created, and the first word is imperial. So if you're not a member of the British Empire, really, you can't be in it. And that's what got me looking at Argentina and USA, really the lost Test nations. So it's an absolutely fascinating era because it's such a vibrant era on the pitch in many ways, but you have these problems off it, and also you do have people, your people worrying even then about the future of Test cricket, which people who follow Test cricket love to do in so many ways. So it's a really, really rich era, and it does actually go a long way to shaping the game's future evolution for better and for worse.
Yeah, and at this point of time, I need to congratulate you on the book. It's a fascinating read. It reads very easily, and it does describe some of those rather tricky periods in Test cricket where it gets a bit jumbled between nations, and we'll come back to that a bit later. But Tim, still on the research, did you research and write this book in a chronological order, or did you jump around a bit between eras?
So I actually started doing stuff that I had a bit more of a sense on. So sort of 60s, 70s, and so on. I did sort of 3 or 4 chapters, partly because I don't think I wanted to. I thought starting in the beginning would always be too daunting, and then actually from then I did the vast majority, in the chapter form as they appear. So I kind of did the weird thing of almost starting in the middle, but then actually from then I started at the very start. And actually, by doing that, I was able to get a sense of trying to get a sense of what was actually kind of new in each era and what was actually not as new, because obviously these often things get credited with being part of an era, and they happened way before. The reverse sweep, to give one example, actually, that actually was popularized in the 1960s in Pakistan. And so anything that was a 92,000 invention, that's not quite true. So, um, yeah, cricket, obviously in each era, they like to take credit with things for being invented in that era.
Mm.
But no, it was. I mean, I've read I think the bibliography, over 300 books, and I read a lot of contemporary autobiographies and stuff. And I would say that obviously the Ranji's book, his classic, the Jubilee Book of Cricket, was a fantastic book.
Mm.
In general, the autobiographies in this era are a hell of a lot shorter than maybe Steve Waugh's autobiography and so on. So I was able to get through a fair few, and probably without being as time consuming as it would be nowadays.
No, absolutely. And I was thinking about Steve Waugh when you brought that up. I mentioned this at the top of the program. Many people already know this, but the phrase "the golden age of cricket" was popularised by Neville Cardus. What do you think he actually meant? Because this is part of my question about, was it a golden age? We have to define what a golden age actually means. What do you think Cardus meant by the golden age, and why did it have a particular affection for him?
Well, he is quite honest. He says the golden age is partly representing, he says, the distant and lost world of the early 1900s. And that is, of course, when he is growing up, and he goes and he sees Trumper's famous century before lunch at Old Trafford in 1902, which actually is probably the fact that you have these 3 weeks, the Trumper innings and the Gilbert Jessup innings, in a 3-run Australia win, a 1-wicket England win, and
Yes.
that is just ridiculous. In terms of, that is the absolute peak of golden age, and almost you could even say Test cricket more broadly. It's extraordinary to have that, but. So Carlos he's very romantic, clearly, but he's also in a way maybe not quite as romantic as we think. So I think he has this kind of awareness that he knows this is very nostalgic as he's saying it, and he's aware that he's not just describing the cricket. Really, this is a whole lost world because of the war to come, and it's a sense of kind of innocence, which people, of course, are looking back in a rose-tinted way because of the calamity that hits the world after. And I suppose we also have the fact with Victor Trumper being probably the absolute embodiment of the golden age. The fact that he dies so young, he's 37, 1915, so he's not killed in the war, but even in the midst of the Great War, it's still an unfathomable loss in Australia. You get thousands of people lining the streets, which is hard to
Mm.
kind of almost hard to reconcile with because you have so many people of Trumper's age and younger who are dying every day.
Mm.
But I think when people are mourning Trumper, yes, they are mourning, a great batsman, and actually a man who many of them love, but they're mourning a lost world. So these kind of all come together, and I think it is actually a great era for cricket on the pitch in many ways. But then the memory of that is multiplied by what happens later, and so it all kind of comes together. And of course, in terms of memory as well, we can talk about photographs. The evolution of photo technology is such that you can now, a memory is not just in your head. You can now see something. Of course, this is why lots of people can almost imagine that they saw Ranji and Trumper bat even when they hadn't, or maybe they've seen them in county games, they hadn't seen them in test matches. Well, now with these some fantastic photographs you can see, and actually, researching the book, we have quite a lot of photos in the book, which is brilliant. And I still think that the early photos are the best, and partly because the batsmen, who are often the kind of the main characters in terms of how we're watching Test cricket, well, they don't have helmets on, so it's actually much more evocative than the later photos.
Yes.
So I think a number of things all come together in this era, which is it's an amazing era, and but also has these kind of contradictions and these tensions, which I wanted to bring about. So I guess I have in researching this, I do have a real kind of reverence, if you like, for the college. So I think a lot of ways it does deserve its name, but I think also our account of it probably should be a little bit more nuanced than it is in the Cardus account.
Hearing you talk about Trumper's death is absolutely accurate, and what it meant for a very young Australian psyche at the time, a very young nation. we can't forget perhaps the other deaths at the time, notably W.G. Grace, who died
In the same
just
year.
within a few months.
Yeah.
Yeah, within a few months. Certainly from the British perspective, Andrew Stoddart as well. So there just seemed to be around that time a collection of former cricketers who happened to pass away, and it was almost like the passing of innocence and obviously the beginning of the calamity of war, which everyone knew was coming, but when it happened, it really was the final curtain on a very affectionate age at the time. So, to answer this question about the state of Test cricket in the Golden Age, my listeners will know that I usually use the imaginary parameters of 1890 to 1914, which is actually a bracket used by many authors, but no one has the exact time frame.
I would slightly challenge yours, but that's all good.
I know in your book you've pointed it out. That is fine. Others believe it begins in 1895, which is Grace's Indian summer. But for this argument, let's say it is 1890. To understand that period, it would be good to understand the period which came immediately before it, so the 1880s and the state of Test cricket in the 1880s. So, Tim, could you elaborate a bit on Test cricket in that era and why it isn't included in the so-called Golden Age?
So obviously we have the birth of the Ashes, 1882, which is 5 years after the first Test match. So yeah, people think, oh, that's when it all begins, when it kicks off, and it's actually not, because you have a terrible era of Ashes cricket. So the first 8 series when the Ashes are contested, I'll come back to that bit later. But yeah, they're all won by England. So from 1882 to 1890, and there's just these non-stop. It is kind of a non-stop mega Ashes, and it's England are really, really dominant, and the people are pretty worried about, is this series just losing competitiveness altogether? And of course, I talked about the Ashes. Well, people aren't really thinking about the Ashes at all at this point. So the Ashes, which were invented in 1882, they kind of go dormant for 10, 12 years later. And really, the series that changes everything actually is 1894-5. So this is this absolutely epic Ashes series. England win 3-2 in Australia. So it continues England's dominance, but actually it's a proper contest for the first time, and that first time in a long period. Also, Australia do win in 1891 too, but it really elevates the series, and it's a 5-match series as well, because lots of these before they were 2 or 3-match series, and it was a bit of a mess. And this is still an era when you do have these other private tours which aren't Test matches and stuff. But look at with W.G. Grace, he only plays 2 of the first 13 Test matches, so often he's just not paid enough to want to go, and he wouldn't have known what was a Test match. There's only in Australian Jones in the 1890s, he retrospectively classes matches as Test matches.
Yes.
Actually, one of the amazing things I found in the book is until 1948, people are still arguing about retrospectively which matches are Test matches. So the 1946 Australia-New Zealand Test, when Australia absolutely obliterate New Zealand, or people are still arguing for a few years later whether that should count as a Test. So yeah, it's not a great era of Test cricket. This is an era where fixture congestion, if you like, England are just playing Australia the whole time. South Africa are very, very weak. England are sending probably a sort of, to be honest, probably like a D team to South Africa in this era, because they basically don't want to win by too much, and if they send their very best team, it would be ridiculous. Australia barely playing. Australia don't really play South Africa in this until the golden age. So Test cricket is really not in a great place at all, and people are worried about it. And the county championship actually is doing pretty well in this era. So there's a sense that is that becoming more important. So the pre-golden age Test cricket is a pretty precarious space, and there's possibly a world where actually Test cricket sort of dies. That's not probably impossible at this point, because it's not the juggernaut that it becomes actually very quickly afterwards.
There's a great book, which I know you're familiar with because it appears in your bibliography, by an Australian writer written about 15 years ago Malcolm Knox called Never a Gentleman's Game. And it specifically talks about the pre-Golden Age era, but then goes into the Golden Age. But he talks about the 1880s in particular, and it's just rife with gambling. And if you look at the cricketers' correspondence, it's just rife with gambling and rioting. And they're more concerned about how much they're getting paid, especially the Australians. And that's not to absolve the Golden Age cricketers from wanting money, certainly not. But in the 1880s, it just seems to dominate the discourse. It's really interesting.
And amazing. I mean, one of the great great nugget in Malcolm's book, which I can quote in mine, is that Australian cricketers in the 1890s, they earned more in real terms than Australian cricketers until 1997, I think. So they're actually very, very well paid at the time, because these tours are basically run as a private enterprise for profit sharing. And actually, one of
Yeah.
the big innovations in the Golden Age is the MCC starts to take control of tours, which helps to get the best players actually going on these tours. So 1903 is the first tour that the MCC run. And that actually means the idea of England is more coherent, rather than you're sort of picking quite an eclectic way often, and often the best players, they can't be bothered to tour, partly because if they're not paying enough, but why they give up literally 7-8 months given the boat trips there and back to go to England or Australia.
I do understand those who argue that the Golden Age didn't start until, say, that great 1894-95 series. And you touched on it briefly there, that the previous tour to Australia in 91-92, which was with W.G. Grace, his second trip to Australia, was a bit of a shambles. I mean, Australia wanted the great Grace to come out again, and then he arrived and he was grossly overweight, and he's paraded around like this celebrity, and he doesn't really perform that well. And of course, amateurism is rife, and the Australian public are just ridiculing him, basically, certainly in the field, because he can't chase after the ball. He's so overweight. But what comes after that, as you say, the 1894-95 series, is, when you look at it through 21st century eyes, it's just amazing. And we've talked about this on my podcast a lot. It's a great series. So many firsts happened in Test cricket in that series, like the first team to enforce the follow-on and then lose, all these sorts of things. It's really interesting. And I'd encourage any of my listeners who are not familiar with the 1894-95 series to investigate. So, Tim, that was the era before the Golden Age. Let's now talk about the era which came immediately after the Golden Age, and that is obviously what happened after the end of the First World War. The whole world had changed after that. Nations were decimated by casualties, and certainly England more so than Australia. So what was the state of play of Test cricket after 1918?
There was a pretty poor era again of Test cricket, which we actually will see later, initially after World War II. But yeah, Australia basically keep thrashing England, and we have this another mega Ashes, 1920 to 21. We have 10 Test matches. Australia win 8-0 over those 10 Test matches, and they even pay games of cricket on the deck, on the boat. The teams are on the boat together in Australia, even win on the deck as well. So no, it's not a great era. Really, 1926 is when the Ashes starts to become competitive again. So Australia, they obliterate England 3 series after. There's obviously a huge, sense of, obviously such a massive sense of loss, and the cricket actually, oddly contrary to romantic image, actually after World War One, cricket is actually quite tedious often. To quote with Jack Hobbs, who's one of the best players both before and after, and he talks about how in the Golden Age it was, you could make a quick 70, everyone would be thrilled, and then after it becomes they start printing the averages in the papers, and actually the pitches kind of become too good. So the pitches in the Golden Age was almost like this sweet spot where it's still pretty hard to score, but you can trust the bounce a little bit, and you can actually, and because the tests are, they're in England, they're 3 days, so it encourages fast scoring, and then it becomes this almost industrial scoring kind of after World War One. So it's a little tedious. And England basically have a lack of bowlers after World War One. So their batting's okay, but their bowlers, they really, really struggle. So the Ashes is not really competitive at all. Although later in the decade you get 3 new Test nations, so that is a seminal for the game. But no, the period after World War One is not a vintage era at all of Test cricket.
I'm glad that you mentioned the Jack Hobbs quote because it is something I've come across a lot in my research of the era. If you read newspaper reports from the 1890s, the number of times they talk about a match defining 40 or a brilliant innings of 29 against great bowling is the sort of thing you wouldn't read about in Test cricket today, where we have this expectation of if they don't score a century, it's almost a failure. And on top of that, we expect big, big Test centuries as well, which, as you say, didn't really come about until after the end of the First World War when pitches began to be doped. And the era of Bradman and Ponsford and Wally Hammond in England, who were just run scoring machines. But in the Golden Age and before, it was really about style and how you scored the runs. And I think this is what Jack Hobbs is alluding to in his analysis. Certainly, as someone who, I mean, Jack Hobbs was someone who played both before and after the Golden Age. He's one of the few who could make that comparison. It's really interesting how we've changed our mentality towards what is a good cricket innings.
Yeah, that's right. But because the scores are so much lower, so in a sense, there's a romantic element probably to some of the reportage. But actually, if the score was at 160, 160, 180, whatever, then actually a 40 was more likely to be a amazing innings. And you can have Gilbert Jessup, who of course his Test average is 21, but he plays one of the most celebrated innings of all time, which in the Basball era we see pops up on the screen all the time as the goal sandwiching still cannot beat.
It is interesting. Jessup is one of those characters, and I'm hoping quite soon to do an episode on Jessup. It's one of the questions I have about his legacy, and we won't go into it now, but you've touched on it. It's just really interesting. Tim, if we return to the phrase, the golden age of cricket, this is again a question I've pondered a lot doing this podcast, and I'd love to know your thoughts. I mean, when we say the golden age of cricket, does that extend itself to all formats of the game? Or was it only a golden age of county cricket, of village cricket? Was it a golden age of colonial cricket in Australia? And was it also a golden age of nations we don't often think about, like the USA or the countries in Asia? What are your thoughts?
I think when people say golden age of cricket, they mean of English cricket, of cricket in England. So they're talking about some of the great Test matches. Obviously, 1902 stands top in England. They're talking about some great county matches. There's also it's also, if you look at the reports at the time, you look at Wisden, it's incredible how much is given to public school cricket. It really is, and it's genuinely it's staggering. And you have I think as David Frith observes,
Yes.
the idea of the golden age, it revolves around batting and it revolves around batsmen from public schools, which is why the praise given to Hobbs, which is seen as the absolute highest praise he could receive, was a professional who bats like an amateur. So it is, I think we kind of underrate the kind of class element here. This is people of a certain background batting in a certain way. I think that is a lot of what's going on here. And of course, there's so much more with before World War One and all the evolution of batting, but there is this link, and it's said that the pad is a second line of defence, but not a first, and so on. So I do think that is such an element that infuses it. And of course, South Africa, actually, which we haven't really talked about. South Africa,
Yes.
South Africa beat England 4-1, 1905-6, and they have a quartet of good bowlers and stuff. So it is a incredible era for South Africa too, albeit quite a brief one, because by the time of the Tri-Series in 1912, they're nowhere near as strong. But no, I think the idea is it's a kind of quintessentially English idea. And maybe I suppose Australia was only born in 1901, so maybe it's too Australia's too young to have a golden age at this point. So I think it is a very English kind of conception, and central. And I do talk in the book about the missed opportunities. So I think, but I don't think anyone who says golden age is thinking of of Bart King and his brilliant bowling
Mm.
for USA in England, and cricket being strong in Argentina, I think it's seen as a quintessentially English concept, and maybe there's something about English society that lends itself more to nostalgia actually than say Australia does. But no, I do think of it as a very English concept.
I think you're absolutely right. And I recently, because I have nothing better to do in my spare time, was looking at some British magazines from that era. This is about 1907. And in the sports section, they give a paragraph to Test cricket. And then the full next page, they have about 16 photographs from the recent, Eton versus Harrow match?
That would be the
at
game, yeah.
at at Lords, and every second photo is a photo of the promenade and people walking up and down, showing their latest clothes, which was it was a society which had a clear class structure, and it was very aware of it. But it is a question which I continue to discuss on this podcast. How far does this golden age extend? And perhaps we just need to clarify.
Yeah, just on that, I suppose it's also an era when to be captaining, you have to be an amateur. So England, from 1887 to 1952, every captain of England is an amateur as well. So that very much feeds into what we've been discussing, I think.
And I think some of the greatest champions of that era, and when I mean champions, I mean they kept the memory of that era alive well after the First World War, were those amateurs like Plum Warner and Archie McLaren and even Ranji.
H.S. Autumn
Yeah,
as a
absolutely.
writer. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's a very human quality to always think that your era was better than this current crop of upstarts. But it was those amateurs who were, even if it didn't yet have a name, they kept that pre-World War One era alive in the public mind. Now, Tim, you've already touched on this briefly, but we'll return now to the technology during the Golden Age and how much this actually helped popularize and spread the word of cricket. You've already mentioned the Beldam photographs. Was there anything else from that time which would have helped firm this era in people's minds?
Well, yeah, I think this is very linked to the rise of the Ashes. So, 1894-5, for the first time, the Pall Mall Gazette in London, it publishes these cabled reports from Down Under, which come out within 5 days of 5 hours of each play. So there's a sense of immediacy. So in London, you can, with a bit of a timeline, but if you're buying the evening paper in London, you can actually follow what's happened in Australia the previous day. So it lends a sense of immediacy to what's happening in kind of down under cricket, and I think it probably helps to create a sense of kind of a link between what's happening in England. For what happens in Australia seems more relevant in England because you can actually observe it not in real time, but in close to real time than never been happened before. So I think that's very important as well. And I think the photo technologies we have talked about, I mean, that is amazing. And of course, I think the great stat is that the Trumper photograph is in 1905. And he averages 17 in that Ashes series, but we remember the photo, we don't remember the average.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is also just a hint of film that comes from this era, but it's rather staged. They're literally playing for the cameras. The only, and I have mentioned this before on the podcast, I think the only existing footage of Trumper batting in a match was from the 1910-11 series in Australia. Australia versus South Africa in Australia. And the footage we have is of Trumper being run out for a duck, which doesn't really sum up his legacy. If only we had footage from that 1902 series,
Yeah.
it would be completely different. So let's talk about some of the developments of the Golden Age that happened on the field, Tim. Developments and evolutions. Let's first talk about the googly or the wrong 'un, depending on which part of the world you're from. How did that delivery come about?
Our best knowledge is this is invented by Bernard Bosanquet, who is nephew of a very famous philosopher in England, and fits within the kind of amateur ethos that was common at the era. So he's playing Oxford University in 1897, we think, and he's messing around with a tennis ball, aiming to spin it from one end of the table to another, and he works out that with his wrist, there's a way to actually to spin it in a different way to a leg break, so he can spin it like an off break, without it being so obvious what he's doing. And so suddenly he has this invention, and he starts to use it. It takes him 3 years to use it in a match, and he initially a lot of balls they're bouncing twice and stuff, but equally it's this he now so his first class wicket with a googly comes off the ball was bounced 4 different times. So it does show that right from the start this was a very hard ball to master. But actually, he only plays 7 tests, but he makes a really crucial role in 2 Ashes wins, both occasions, with leg breaks and googlies. And then because this is a cosmopolitan era, actually, some people say this is the first. Actually, a lot of people say this is the first great era of globalization before World War One, and you have a real synergy between English cricket and South African cricket. Lots of people are actually kind of Anglo-South Africans who could legitimately play for either country, and so Reggie Schwartz is one of these. So he's educated in England, and then he plays for England Rugby Union before he moves to South Africa. And then he plays with Bosanquet in 1901 and 1902 for Middlesex, and he learns the googly, and then he returns back to South Africa, and then he passes it on to 3 other South Africans, including Aubrey Faulkner. And then South Africa become the kind of first googly kings, and they're using these matting pitches basically, which offer quite a lot of assistance to spin. And they record an incredible 4-1 victory over England in 1905-6. Begin with a epic 1-wicket victory in the first test when the last pair had 45. It is a seminal series win. It's not against a full strength England side, but it's against a pretty good side. So it really does mark South Africa's leap forward. They're now a team that can be taken seriously. And actually just kind of reflecting, with benefit of where we are in 2025, it's incredible that the first team that had, a quartet of spinners that had attacked based around spin was South Africa, because actually in Test history is spinners get fewer wickets in South Africa than any other country. So it is remarkable this comes from South Africa.
That is an excellent point. And yeah, I think overall we underestimate just the absolute power that the invention of the wrong 'un would have been at the time. I mean, nothing like this existed before. We take it for granted now that all leg spin bowlers know how to do the reverse spin, while it seemingly looks like it comes out of their hand at the same angle. But at the time, and there are reports of the Australian cricketers facing the wrong 'un for the first time and just being absolutely bamboozled. They had absolutely no idea where it was going. They quickly catch on, of course, and then it becomes quite standard for leg spin bowlers to bowl it out the other side of the hand. But perhaps we need to remind ourselves and give credit to the inventor of the wrong 'un. I mean, for decades afterwards, it's the ball is known as the Bosey, certainly in Australia.
Yeah.
Um,
And of course, because cricket has always been a batsman's game, so initially there are calls in some quarters to ban this unfair
yes,
weapon.
yes. Now, what other evolutions happen in this period? Let's talk about batting. What about the leg glance or the late cut? Who popularized that? And what implications would have that had for the fielding team at the time?
So both these shots, leg glance and leg cut, they come from Ranji, and the origin story is really quite amazing. Which is he's at Cambridge. He's renowned for he's maybe a bit scared of fast bowlers. So he backs away, and his coach he pegs his right leg to the ground, which stops him from backing away from the ball. And then out of that, he starts to hit straight balls to the leg side. So before, if the ball was on your legs, you might hit it to the leg side. But what Ranji's, he's the first to hit, well, the first that we know and first to do it very well, to hit balls on a third, off stump, middle off stump, and even slightly outside off stump line to the legs, to the onside. So he, what we think of as a Mark Wall shot, whatever, flicking the ball from just outside off. That comes from Ranji. So it's not that people never hit on the leg side before, but only if it was the ball was aimed at their legs, which is why you would commonly have probably a 7-2, even an 8-1 field. So what Ranji does, he changes the geometry of the batting of the field really from batsmen. So it opens up new areas to score runs, and bowlers suddenly they can't. Before, if you bowled outside of some, you just didn't, your legs side, you just didn't need anyone there. And now as a bowlers, you have much more to think about. So I guess we saw with WG Grace, he was the first to play off both the front and the back foot. So before you had people who played off either the front or the back. And then Ranji's almost probably the next great leap forward in batting. So he's playing both front and back, and he's opening up the field. And obviously it's just, again, but this is important, but stylistically it's a beautiful, beautiful shot, and that does add a level to the understanding of it and the appreciation of it. And even again with photographs, just looking at the shot, it is an incredible shot to see, such an elegant shot, and that is all important. So it all kind of comes together, and I've got the extra layer is, Ranji, one of the first kind of people to play Test cricket as well. So there's a broader significance from this shot.
You touch on exactly what I was going to say. I mean, it all comes together at the same time. Ranji, very stylish, and he basically invents these two shots. And when you add the Belden photographs from the time, it just looks so beautiful. And the photographs probably catapulted the shot into the public eye as well. And then you have Fry and Ranji himself describing the shots themselves through their very verbose writing. It all sort of propels it into the future.
But it's interesting. It's interesting when Ranji describes it in Jubilee Book of Cricket. He does it in a pragmatic way. Actually, he says this shot may look beautiful, but I'm doing it to score runs, basically.
Yeah.
So utilitarian. It's driven by utilitarian reasons, even though it looks so fantastic.
And he's probably he's battling that idea of what it means to be a batsman in the golden age, because there was the received wisdom that style was more important than the number of runs. And then you get this new generation led by Fry and Ranji, who obviously just want to score runs, and they happen to be very stylish. But as you say, he really just wants to score runs.